All right, in this video, we're going to update to the latest versions of the Firebase dependencies. If you go to firebase.flutter.dev, you can see what the latest version is right in this table here. And the two that we're most interested in right now are the authentication, which is on 0.18 or 0.18.0, and Cloud Firestore, which is on 0.14.0. If you look in our app here, in our pubspec.yaml, our Cloud Firestore is on, or the one that I'm on is 0.12, so this is a bit outdated, and the Firebase Auth is on 0.15, so both of these are quite a bit outdated. Before we update these packages, let's make sure we're on the latest version of Flutter. I actually just updated mine right before doing this, but if you type in Flutter -- version, you can see what version you're on, 1.20.3. If you go into Flutter Dev and you look up the Flutter SDK releases, you want the stable channel, and you can see that 0.20.3 is the newest one. I think before making this video, I was somewhere back in like 1.9. So first you're gonna update that. So if you test running your app right now that you're on the newer version of Flutter, for me, that actually does not work. So basically just upgrading Flutter itself, for me, no longer makes the app work. The reason I believe is because the newest version of Flutter is not compatible with these older versions of some of these packages. Let's go ahead and update these packages. Firstly, one thing I'll show you is if you run this pub outdated, it'll actually show you all the packages that you have that are out of date. So we are going to essentially update most of them, but let's do just the Firebase stuff first, and then we'll kind of work through the dependencies of that as we go. Now, with the Flutter Fire, there is actually a migration guide, and I'll link that below. This is something I did not find until kind of halfway through trying to do this update, and the migration guide actually did help a lot. This, I will say, was quite a tricky upgrade for me. It actually took me about a day to figure out the whole thing, which these upgrades normally aren't this complex. But let me show you a couple things here. If you look at Cloud Firestore here, you can see that version 0.14 has a ton of breaking changes and a lot of depreciated code. So these are very big updates that the Flutter team, or rather the Firebase team, has made for the Flutter SDK. That is why I think this update was a little bit more painful for me, at least, although I was kind of going into it blind. Luckily, you are not, and you are going to be able to do this really quickly by following this video. But if you look at Cloud Firestore, you see there's a lot of changes there. Firebase Auth also getting on 0.18 has a lot of breaking changes as well. This, I think, is all because the Firebase SDK for Flutter is going through a lot of big changes right now. Their roadmap, which I believe you could view on Flutter Fire here, you can check out the roadmap. They're kind of in the process of doing these very big updates, it looks like, to everything, and you can see this is kind of, I don't know, you can read more about it here, but definitely this is good stuff. It's going to be bringing a lot more features to the Firebase SDK with Flutter. But anyway, that I think is why these are such big changes. If we look at the migration guide here, it's pretty straightforward. The first thing we need to do is actually add Firebase core, because with this new setup that basically I was just talking about, that they're changing with the SDK for Firebase and Flutter, you now are going to be required to have Firebase core. So back here in our project, the first thing we're going to do is add a new dependency here, and we'll put it right at the top, and it's going to be that Firebase core version 5.0.0. And now we can actually go ahead and update the Firebase Auth, which Firebase Auth is going to be 0.18.0. And I don't have crash analytics set up, but if you do upgrade it to that package, I do have Cloud Firestore, so I will be updating that one as well. If you leave off the plus, it will still be included. Basically, it won't lock you in at +2, so if it goes to +3, +4, +5, and you redo pubget, it will update you to that most recent version. Now that we have those updated, we're actually going to run pubget. All right, and then when we run that pubget, you're going to see that there's a clash of dependencies right here. So Firebase add mob, this error is basically saying Firebase add mob is on version 0.9.1, and this is depending on a Firebase core 0.4.2. But these new Firebase packages that we upgraded, meaning Cloud Firestore and Firebase Auth, they are requiring Firebase core 0.5.0. So essentially, all this is saying is we can't have Firebase AdMob on the version that it's on because it's incompatible with the new version of Firebase core that we just updated to. Now, luckily, there is actually a dev patch for this in Firebase AdMob at the time of this video, which is September 12th. This dev version here is actually going to allow us to get to that Firebase core 0.5.0. Now, I'm not sure that this is fully going to be good for production, but I'm guessing within a couple weeks this will be moved to the production branch and it'll be an actual stable branch instead of a dev version. But for now, we are going to use this dev version or else we won't be able to upgrade at all. So find Firebase AdMob, and it's right here, and go ahead and update that to 0.10.0. Now, if we run pubget, we can see if we're good. All right, now this error here is basically saying that Firebase Auth Web is depending, it actually depends on intl 0.16.1. So we can just actually update that package safely to that. We were on 15.7. Now, if we run the pubget, let's see what we're getting. All right, no errors on that right now, so that's good. I will say from already doing this, from already testing this earlier, I had some issues with Dio, and earlier we had to keep this on a lower version. We had to keep this on this lower version here because it was not working with, I believe, Google sign-in, but now that will no longer be an issue because of this. So we can actually go to the latest version of this right now, which is 3.0.10. We can pubget that. If we run pub outdated again, let's see which packages we're a little bit outdated on and just see. Google sign-in we can update, so the latest version of that is 4.5.3. I think it's actually pretty much safe to upgrade any of these that are outdated. You can do that actually by just running pub upgrade, and that's going to run all the ones that are outdated with the new ones. So now if we run pub updated, all right, a lot of these that are left are pretty much just minor version updates, so I think I'm just going to leave the rest how they are. And you'll also notice that since this is a dev version, you'll see it is resolvable to this lower version, and it's basically telling you this is the latest stable version. So these are basically, that's why this one shows up in this list, even though it is on a higher version. All right, but we should be good. If you try and run the app right now, I still don't think it's going to work. The other thing that's recommended to run is a Flutter clean. This Flutter clean will actually clear some cached files and kind of reset some of the files. It'll actually delete some of the files from the Xcode builder and a lot of cached files that way that sometimes get in the way of actually running the app. So there are a couple changes now to how we would have actually installed the app had we been doing this, had we been setting it up brand new right now. So first we could do it for Android. And if you pull up an Android device, you'll notice that it actually is not working on Android either right now. So let's start by updating those configurations. So you want to find the Android folder here, and then we're going to be going to the build.gradle file. And right in here, you can see in the dependencies, which is actually right at the top here, in this dependencies list, we want to change one of the class paths. And that's going to be this one right here for the Google GMS. And we want to change that to version 4.3.3. And we'll save that. Then we actually want to update our Gradle version to be using 5.0. So we're going to go into the Gradle folder here, and then the wrapper and Gradle wrapper properties. And basically in this distribution URL, we're just going to change the version, which is at the end here. And it's going to be to the newest version, which is actually 5.6.2. and we'll save that. The last thing for Android is to actually go into this app folder here and then go to that build.gradle file. Now notice this is a different build.gradle file than the one we were in just before. In here, there are two things we're going to do. Firstly, we're going to find the dependencies section in here, and we're going to remove the implements Firebase core. We no longer need that because it's going to be built into Firebase core that we just imported. And then another thing we're going to do in here, you'll notice this file is red, and this right here is causing an error, this Gradle exception. So this Gradle exception function here has actually changed to a file not found Gradle exception function. Basically the name of it just changed. So you're going to want to update that there. At this point, if you run it, now that we made all those Android changes, we are getting a bunch of errors, but these errors are actually pretty good. They're all errors in the code where basically we need to update stuff because of the new Firebase versions. Again, a lot of stuff got depreciated, both in Cloud Firestore and Firebase Auth. So we are going to need to make code updates based on these changes before we can actually get the app running. So before we do these code updates, let's actually just quickly finish the configuration for iOS. And basically, if we can get the iOS app to give us these errors as well, then we will be in a good spot because we just need to update the code at that point. If we run the iOS version, you'll see there are still bigger configuration errors, meaning they're outside the code, and let's go ahead and get those fixed now. So you'll see we're getting errors with CocoaPods. You can see there's issues with the pod file, and basically what happens here is this podfile.lock is set to the old version still, so it isn't fully updated, and when we're trying to run it, it is still looking at that older version even though we're configured on the newer version, so it's causing some issues. If we go back to the terminal here, the first thing we're going to do is actually remove the pod file and the podfile.lock. So we're going to need to cd into the iOS folder, which is right here. So now we're in this folder in the terminal, and we're just going to remove, which the shorthand for that is rm, and then we're going to type podfile, and we'll remove that, and then we're also going to remove the podfile.lock. Now we're going to run pod install. All right, so since there's no pod file, if you actually just try and run the app, it will generate the pod file for us. That's probably the quickest way to do it. All right, so we got the same error, but now we have our pod file back, so we can now run from the terminal. We can run pod install again. And you'll see there's some issues there. So if we run pod repo update, and then pod install. All right, at this point, our pod file should be updated now to the latest versions. This error that I kept getting for quite some time, I believe is due to the AdMob Flutter package. So this AdMob Flutter package, which we actually use to show those banner ads in the middle of our app, is actually not compatible with this latest version of Flutter and in our updated Firebase packages. So we're actually going to have to remove that right now. So we're going to remove that in this video, and in the very next video I'm going to show you how to reset up those banner ads with this latest version. But run the pub-get on that so that we remove that from our pubspec.yaml, then go back to the terminal, and we're going to run a Flutter clean. And then from here, we're going to actually try and run our app again and see if that at least allows the app to show those same errors that we were seeing from the Android version. All right, so you'll see all those errors that we got about the pod file and the pod file installing. Those are all gone, and now we are actually getting that same error that we initially got when we first upgraded just Flutter. So that actually is a good thing. The problems here are now all just syntax based in the code based on the Firebase Auth and Firebase core updates. So now we can actually go into the code and fix all those depreciated or changed features of Firebase now. All right, so we're actually going to start by opening up our lib folder here, and we're going to start in our services and the auth service. And we're just going to go through and fix the auth related Firebase bugs first. So if you hover over it, you can kind of see what the change is. This one has turned into auth state changes as a function, so update that. This is now going to return a user type instead of Firebase user type. Whenever we were calling current user, that has changed from a function to just a getter. So basically we just can remove every time we were calling that the parentheses at the end. Update user info, the way this was set up, we used to have to create the object and then pass the object to update profile, but now we can actually just give it the parameters itself. So basically we just need to give this the display name here and it will look like that. Then we can actually remove this stuff up here. The Firebase user type is now just a user type, and more of the current user issues. For the Auth provider here, this used to have a named parameter. Now it's a non-named parameter, so you can just pass apple.com there. Another current user here. This is again a very similar update info issue here. We're updating the profile here, but we're really only changing the display name, and we're making that this string here. So we can actually remove all of these lines right there, and we no longer need this. Then we actually don't need to wait for the current user because we will already have the current user. And since we removed that, we're going to have to call this on the Firebase auth current user, and that line should work. Get credential has been changed to just credential. For sign in with credential, auth results has actually changed to a user credential type. The auth exception has actually turned into a Firebase auth exception. And same with this auth result. This is now a user credential. There are a couple left in here that aren't errors, but are basically the depreciation warnings. So credential was there. You can see over on the right here, you can actually get to where those issues are. They're coming up kind of in a yellow color. So another credential change, another one there, and there. You'll also see there's a couple times where this await is underlined. We actually don't need to await getting the current user anymore. It's just going to be able to, it's no longer asynchronous function. It's just going to be available now, which is quite nice. So yeah, that should be basically it for this file. Now we can look at our views, and really only our home view is affected by this. Firstly, there's a couple imports here that we just aren't using, so we could remove those. Firebase addmob, if you remember, we had to remove that package, so let's just comment that out for now. We also are initializing addmob here, so let's comment that out. And then finally at the bottom where we have that addmob banner, we can also comment that out. Cool, so now addmob Flutter has been removed from the home page. Now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to actually go to the main.dart file, and we do need to create an instance of Firebase now. So with this new update, we actually need to create that Firebase instance in our app when we first load the app. So we're going to do that right here in our main, and this is going to have to become an async function now. Right after this widgets Flutter binding, we can create that instance of Firebase. So we're going to await this, and we're just going to call Firebase, then we can call initialize app. Firebase actually is going to need to be, Firebase core is actually going to need to be added to this file, and then we'll see that initialize app comes up and the autocomplete there. This is 100% needed now. We did not used to need this, obviously, but if you don't have this, basically no Firebase stuff will work. Your app won't even run. So add that to your main.dart. Now we'll go back to the home view, and there are some updates we're going to need to make here outside of just the addmob removal, which we just did. Again, we're going to use this left side over here to guide us. Instead of calling Firestore, we're now going to call Firebase Firestore, and that happens a couple times here. Document has now been replaced with doc, and we'll do that here as well. Instead of get documents, we're going to be using just get. And also the documents here will be changed to docs. All right, this homepage should be good. Now there is one issue actually with this from snapshot. And if you go to the model here and the trip model, you'll actually see a lot of these errors right here. So the problem here is we are still getting a document snapshot, but the way that we can actually retrieve the data on that snapshot, so the title for instance, or the start date, is we have to first call data on that snapshot. And then once we call data, we can access the data on it. So we pretty much just have to add this to each part. We pretty much just have to call data on the snapshot before we get any of that data. The document ID has actually been depreciated to just ID, or changed rather. And that should be good there. If we save this, another thing we can look at real quick is if we go into our Dart analysis, you can see where we still have some issues. So there are quite a few actually. This looks like it's a Firebase Fire. This should just be Firebase Firestore. If we just go, we're gonna just go through all of these. It shouldn't take too long actually. Body 1, this is in our main.dart. This has been updated to be called body text 2. And it's there as well. Set data has been changed to just set. Our update data has just been changed to update. It looks like the rest of these are all just repeats of ones we've already covered, so I'll just update all those real quick right now. All right, so now all of those warnings are gone. So at this point, we should be able to actually run our app. So we'll do it on Android and iOS. We'll test both. So I've also updated my computer to be using the latest version of Xcode as well as iOS 14. So my simulator now is going to be an iOS 14 version, and this just came out pretty much this past week. We'll be testing it in this newer iOS 14 simulator, and you're going to, when you install Xcode, make sure you open up Xcode because it won't work unless you open up Xcode and pretty much accept the terms and conditions there. But let's go ahead and run this. So yes, you can see I'm on iOS 14 now, and that's not a necessary step for this. You could keep your computer not updated, and obviously if you're not on a Mac, none of that really matters at all. But I just want to show you that this does work on the latest version of iOS, which is iOS 14. All right, great. So the app is definitely loading on iOS. I can sign in with a test account that I have, and you can see all of my trips are loading, and I can go to my trip detail page. Seems like everything's still working, no errors, so everything looks good in that sense. You will notice we no longer have that ad down here because we did remove that banner ad. But if we do add a new trip, you'll see we do still have our interstitial ad working because we were using a different package for this ad here. And again, in the next video, I will show you how to get that banner ad back up. Probably not using the package that we were using, but I'll look into doing it a different way. All right, lastly, real quick, let's make sure this works on Android. And looks good on Android. The app did load up. We can sign in real quick just to make sure everything appears to work there as well. And you can see everything is loading here and looking pretty good. All right, that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully this makes upgrading your version of Firebase and Flutter a little bit easier than it was for me. This, I will say, was kind of a out of the normal upgrade. I do think typically the upgrades go pretty seamlessly and easily, but again, there's going to be a lot of new features, it seems, coming from that Firebase team in Flutter. So pretty exciting stuff. If you haven't already, consider subscribing. All right, ciao for now.